Yellow and Red mixed by Digits 27. Chapter 20. Naruto looked around in wonder and awe. He had never seen so many people gathered around in one place before. The stadium was massive, yet he never even recollected seeing it before now. Even when he was smaller, he thought he would recognize such an enormous building. The stands were filled to the brim with people, all of whom were talking amongst one another, taking bets on the upcoming fights, for simply waiting in unconcealed anticipation. The arena itself was equally impressive in size, if a little dull and plain for his taste. There were a few trees off to one side, but other than that, not much else. Even some kind of water feature would be nice. Not everyone was like the Nandem Hokage and could create the Suetan techniques out of thin air. He looked around for anything that might be advantageous as the last of the spectators filled into their seats. The massive open areas would suit his fighting style well, but he could also say the same thing about the boy standing confidently across from him. Any sized area was suited to Neji's close range combat style. It was just uncomfortable that Naruto didn't have any long range attacks. It irritated him to no end that he had a jutsu that could finish his fight in no time at all, but he knew it would be extremely overkill to use. He shrugged to himself passively. If he was really struggling, he would just use it anyway. Naruto calmly awaited the initiation of the fight while simultaneously weighing up his opponent. He had plenty of chances to train over the month-long period every fighter had been given, and he had used them to the fullest. He cursed the damn Hyuga fighting style. It was in direct contrast to his more heavy-handed attacks. Getting in close and personal with this guy would be bad for him. He had planned accordingly, but it didn't mean he had to like it. He looked up where the Hokage sat in his personal box and smiled before he noticed the conspicuously unoccupied chair to his left. His thoughts turned sour as he thought about Gaara and his father's murderer, causing his hands to subconsciously clench into fists. He quickly stopped that, not wanting to give the impression the waiting was getting to him. He thought instead about Tayuya, how after the incident with Jiraiya, everything had returned to some semblance of normalcy between them. She had been a huge help in his training, having nothing to train for herself, but keeping her skills sharp all the same. However, all the time when he would be waiting only for her to pull out that accursed flute really got to him. Sometimes he wished he had never bought the offending object in the first place, discounting all the times it had come in handy on missions. One day, he was really going to have to come up with a solution for that so his enemies couldn't take advantage of it. Suddenly, he was finally brought out of his own personal monologue by the start of the match. He quickly noticed the very focused-looking Hyuga running towards him, and on pure reflexes, he sent Chakra to his feet and used it to launch himself over the other boy's head. He hadn't expected the fight to start so soon, but at least he had ticked off. He had ticked off jumping ability. He had ticked off jumping ability on his little tuning tick list. He was under no illusion here. The objective was not to win, but to showcase his abilities. He brought up the list in his mind, and at the very top of it were close range combat skills. He groaned at the thought, but nevertheless, he rooted his feet to the ground and awaited the next change of the pale eyed boy. Neji got close and began lashing out with his deadly and incapacitating blows. Naruto's eyes widened when one stray blow for the Hyuga's outstretched finger managed to brush his arm. He was shocked because despite knowing that it had hit him, he felt nothing from the contact. He rushed back from the encounter, looking at the spot where a small red dot had appeared, signifying the loss of a tenketsu. He cursed the Hyuga again. He didn't know the blows were also anesthetized. That would be a pain if he didn't even realize that he was being hit. Once again, he found himself in close proximity with the Hyuga, dodging for all he was worth the lightning fast attacks. It was really just a good thing that Naruto was faster, or so he thought at least. He had looked up from his arm. A little too late to see Neji already striking out at his body again and again. It was too fast and too sudden for Naruto to counter, as he felt more and more of his chakra being sealed off. The violent and sudden attack finally let off, and he was allowed to slump to his knees. His body currently useless from the neck down. He might have been scared right now if he didn't know about his ability beforehand. As it was, he was in fact prepared and Like promised, QB's chakra quickly flooded his body, forcing opened the closed junctions in his chakra network. It was only enough to do exactly that. No use alerting every high-level shinobi in Konoha with the foreign chakra. He smirked as he stood up, mostly because of Neji's disbelieving face as he looked at the boy who should have had difficulty breathing now, never mind standing up. Naruto used that hesitation to rush in and get a few solid blows to Neji's midsection before years of instinctive training kicked in and the Jukin attack came back in full force. Despite Neji's newfound wariness concerning his opponent and his impossible abilities, Naruto found himself in the exact same situation as before. All he could do was dodge the annoying fingers, unable to counter or retaliate as he would have liked, especially now that his Tenketsu could no longer be reopened after a while, which he could tell by Neji's increasingly frustrated appearance. Naruto finally backed away from the close-quarter confrontation. He figured that dodging Jukin blows for that long would be enough to get him a decent score in Taijutsu. Next up came his favorite. He jumped back into the center of the arena while Neji watched on, wary of what his opponent was attempting to do. Naruto quickly molded the required chakra and went through the hand cells as quickly as he could without making a mistake. Wind style, rotating jutsu. As soon as he said it, his body slanted at an awkward angle to the ground, and he started windmilling his arms wildly, like he was able to fall over. Neji thought that was exactly what was happening. Believing his opponent had screwed up the jutsu, he began to run at Naruto, confident about taking advantage of his enemy's blunder before he could right himself. Naruto just smirked as his clenched fist opened up, his fingers outstretched like blades. Everybody in the arena watched on, intrigued as the wind began to pick up when Naruto's arms sliced through the air. There were a few gasps as the air at the very edge of his pointed hands became white, forming a perfect circle that grew into a wheel of razor-sharp air. There were even more gasps as the spinning scythe launched out from Naruto directly at Neji. The running Hyuga dodged to the side just in time to avoid the spinning wheel of air, only to see it dig a vicious gash into the solid stone wall behind him. Naruto wasn't done yet, though. Quicker than before, another wheel began forming and was quickly launched from his position. Once again, Neji was forced to dodge as the even faster wind scythe span past him, grazing his sleeve by a few centimeters. Naruto kept this up, launching one after the other at the Hyuga, who was unable to do anything but dodge the dangerous jutsu until finally he became overwhelmed and activated his ultimate defense, rotation. The sphere of blue energy erupted into life as Neji span around, releasing the required chakra from his own Tenketsu. He smirked as the blade he had been unable to dodge approached, clearly being able to see the chakra-infused wind with his Byakugan. The smirk vanished when he noticed the blade of air neatly sliced right past his normally impenetrable bubble, only some of the chakra being lost. He wasn't hit fully in the chest. The only thing saving him from a rather unpleasant end was the amount of chakra that had been drained from the attack by his defense. Even so, he now had a thin line up his chest where the spinning wheel met his body. Luckily for him, Naruto couldn't maintain the jutsu any longer, coming to a stop on his knee with one fist on the ground. That jutsu always left him a little dizzy. Perhaps after his fight, he could ask Neji. He could ask how Neji managed it with his own spinning technique, since he didn't appear dizzy at all. He warily got up, noticing his opponent doing the same, now sporting a thin cut through his shirt, which was slowly being stained red. It was hardly life-threatening, but if the fight continued on, then it would work in Naruto's favor. Hopefully, it would at least slow the Hyuga prodigy down enough for what Naruto had planned next. He formed a now very familiar one-headed seal, and instantly 4 more of him appeared, 2 on either side. He hoped that a one-handed shadow clone jutsu would earn him some points in the judge's book, but he couldn't focus on that now. He sent his clones off to attack Neji, and they quickly surrounded him, approaching slowly as Neji looked around him. His Byakugan was confused by the situation. He had no idea which of the clones was the real Naruto. Each one had identical chakra, and there was nothing else they were formed from. He was even more surprised when one lashed out and he felt the air from the attack move over his now bent over body. It was quickly followed by a tandem attack from the clone opposite, which felt equally real. Neji didn't know how that was even possible. He had heard of clones with solidity, but none of that were made out of seemingly nothing. He suddenly treated each one as a potential threat as he blocked parried or dodged their perfectly in time attacks that left him just on guard, but not fully open. He could feel them holding back for some reason and decided to take advantage of that. In a moment of respite after one clone had finished his attack and another was just beginning, he lashed out with his foot and caught the third clone square in the chest. His eyes opened a little wider when it simply burst into smoke, causing him to cough slightly. He turned to face down his now reduced opponents, only for them to burst into smoke as well. He furrowed his brow, wondering at the strange tactic. As he tried to wave some of the smoke away from him, his opponent knew he had the Byakugan. He couldn't be planning on using a smoke screen unless he was an idiot. Speaking of which, Neji noticed the absence of the fifth Naruto just a little bit too late, as Sato Original burst out of the ground underneath his feet, catching the boy in a solid uppercut that was enough to launch him a few feet backwards. Naruto stood over Neji's crumpled body, checking him over to see if he really was out or he was just faking. Deciding that the boy really was unfit to continue, he nodded with a smile before allowing the proctor to approach and announced him the victor. There was a momentary silence from the crowd as they stared down at the blonde-haired winner before it erupted into cheers. Naruto basked in the praise for a few seconds, but didn't let it get to his head. He also managed to hear more than a few groans as people ripped up their betting tickets. It would appear he was not the favorite for this particular match. That just widened his smile. Sometimes it was good to be the victorious underdog. It made the achievement feel that much better. Maintaining his satisfied smile, he shrinked out of the arena and into the competitor's box just for that added flair, and allowed the next opponents to begin. Well, I can't believe your teammate beat Neji. Toyuya cringed at the sickly sweet but familiar voice. She shrank into the seat, hoping that for some reason Gara was nearby, and that was who Ino was talking to. She was proved wrong when the blonde sat down next to her, followed by the pink-haired girl who was part of their amusing double KO. He was the rookie of the year last year. Everybody thought he was going to win this. Toyuya smirked at that. Even if Naruto hadn't won, Garo would have wiped the floor with the Hyuga prodigy. Don't be stupid, Ino pig. Sasuke will easily win this. Toyuya tried to inch away from the two girls as they argued, hoping that they would forget she was here. I don't know, forehead. That Naruto guy looks pretty strong. Toyuya chuckled at the nickname, only now noticing the rather large forehead of the bubblegum Konoichi. It proved to be her downfall as the notice alerted the two arguing ninja of her presence once again. The pink-haired one that for now Toyuya would call bubblegum started to look her over critically. It made her really uncomfortable. Hey, why don't you have anything on your forehead protector? Aren't you from the village hidden in the sand? Tagia groaned, looking for an escape from the boring and pointless conversation. She wished she could go to the competitor's box, but she wasn't allowed. Instead, she just elected to completely ignore the two girls. It didn't work last time, but she held out hope. Shut up, forehead. She's probably worried about her boyfriend. He took a bit of a beating from Neji after all. Toya had to try really hard not to respond to the obvious attempt at getting her riled up. Even so, she felt her eye begin to twitch out of annoyance and bit back the urge to bring out her flute. Must not kill Konoha Konoichi. Must not kill allies. Must not kill Konoha Konoichi. Nato appeared in the box to a fairly amusing sight. Gar was staring at Shino, and Shino was staring right back. The two stork boys just looked at one another. Gar's gaze was as unblinking as Shino's shaded glasses made him out to be. It was the most interesting staring contest Naruto had ever seen, and he was just captivated by it. However, considered that Shino was next, he decided to interrupt and coughed loud enough for both the quiet ninjas to hear. Shino turned to him and nodded in acknowledgement before he disappeared in a cloud of bugs. Reappearing in the arena floor a few seconds later, Gaara just stayed quiet as Naruto walked over, a confused but bemused expression on his face. As he looked at his friend, he too stood there side by side for a few moments, watching as Dozu also made his way down to the arena. I like him. Naruto smirked at his friend's comment, but refocused his attention to where the two new opponents were seemingly arguing. I said I forfeit. For the briefest of moments, Shino let out a rather annoyed scowl. One wouldn't have seen it unless you looked for it. Hayate just narrowed his eyes at the sound ninja, annoyed by this sudden turn of events. Are you sure about this? Once you forfeit, you cannot re-enter the competition. Dozo merely nodded, his one visible eye warily watching Shino's silent and passive form. Yeah, you heard me. I'm not fighting the bug freak after what he did to Zaku. Because of his mirrored glasses, those who mirrored missed the evil look Shino was giving him. Not that he would have wanted to notice anyway. Hayate just rubbed the back of his head, coughing into his hand a little, unsure about what to do. Oh, well, okay then. Dozu has forfeited. Would the next two competitors please come to the arena? He followed the shout with a rather unhealthy bout of coughing into his hand. That in turn was followed by protest and booing from the audience. Naruto watched as Shikamaru lazily got up from his position on the floor of the box. He walked over to the edge of the viewing arena, looking like he was also considering forfeiting. However, for different reasons. This is such a drag. Lee suddenly popped up behind him, his eyes almost flaming with excitement. Come on, youthful opponent, now is the time we must fight. With that, Lee patted Shikamaru a little hard on the back, too hard as he quickly stumbled and forward to land painfully on his face down on the arena floor. By the time he had picked himself up, Lee had already run down the side of the arena, happily hopping up and down in the middle of the stadium in anticipation. Shikamaru groaned again, grumbling more unintelligible complaints as he very slowly made his way towards where Lee and Hayate stood waiting. Both getting waited for the proctor to begin the match. Lee was still bouncing and Shikamaru was much more calm and collected. His hands naturally found their way together, as so his thumbs and index fingers made a circle between his hands. He was only now starting to regret not planning this match out in advance, but at the time he found it too troublesome. He began to run through scenarios in his mind, but it also came back to the same idea based on what he knew about Lee. It didn't exactly look good for him. Shikamaru would be the first to say that he wasn't good in solo fights. Despite what happened in the preliminaries, he had merely been lucky in his circumstances and surroundings. Not that it wasn't him who took those things into account and used them. Lee was exactly the opposite, practically built for solo matches thanks to his extraordinary trained body and lightning fast reflexes. Shikamaru wouldn't be like that until he began learning the rest of his family jutsus. He could have already, but he much preferred to just lie back and watch the clouds. He did that as he waited. He leaned his head back and chose a cloud, watching the white poofy accumulation of condensed water float lazily across the sky. It would be magnificent if he could be one without a care in the world, just floating along without problems or trouble. His trouble for the moment was more focused on the larger version of himself in the crowd, thinking on how he would make his sensei proud in this match. Both teens were distracted when Hayate finally jumped back, so for a few seconds neither did anything, both lost in their own little worlds. Surprisingly, it was Shikamaru who realized the match had started first. It immediately used his family's most recognizable jutsu, Shadow Possession Jutsu. Lee heard the shout in time and instantly jumped backwards, a surprising distance too. He landed well out of range of Shikamaru's elongated shadow. Watching it carefully, he had seen it in the preliminary, so he knew not to come too close. This, of course, posed a massive problem in that his fighting style solely consisted of up-close and personal taijutsu attacks. If he couldn't even get near Shikamaru, then all of that was completely useless. Without anything else to do, the two opponents were at an impasse. Shikamaru couldn't move closer to Lee, or he would be out of the extending effects of the wall shadow, and Lee couldn't get close to Shikamaru. Period. Both getting complete their opinions, and eventually it was Lee who came to a conclusion first. He would just have to be faster than the shadow. With that, he launched himself forward, weaving and ducking randomly in an attempt to confuse Shikamaru. Luckily for the young tactician, he had already considered his opponent's brash nature before he had even thought about making the attack. He withheld using his shadow until the last second, his last safe moment, before unleashing it in one go. 5 feet away from Shikamaru, Lee froze in place, uncomfortably settling in the same slouchy position as the lazy Nara. Shikamaru just smiled, already reaching for his shuriken pouch. Lee did the same, but there was no pouch where he was reaching for. Shikamaru lazily brought several of the shuriken out and stretched his arm back ready to throw them. He only intended to disable Lee, so he lowered his aim for the body's leg, using the fluorescent orange leg warmers as a target. He let loose the splintering metal while Lee, copying the phantom motion, motions, and each one struck Lee's leg precisely. However, the smile that had graced the normally apathetic boy's features dropped when the shurikens merely ricocheted off the leg warmers with a metallic clang. A few 10 seconds later, and the leg warmers fluttered to the floor, ripped clean off, revealing what they hid beneath. The two large ankle weights, which had likewise been severed, that soon followed, making a very noticeable crater in the ground as they slid off Lee's legs. The ever-present Rock Lee let out the largest smile imaginable, and suddenly Shikamaru felt his hold on the jutsu weaken. Everybody in the stadium, Nara clan especially, gawked as Lee first took a step forward, followed by another. Shikamaru couldn't believe what he was seeing. There was just no way anybody could be that strong. Even so, the revolutions of the revolts of sweat lazily making their way down his face told him otherwise. As he struggled to maintain the exhaustive jutsu, his mind was in overdrive, trying to come up with a solution to this new problem that he had not foreseen. Even as he thought, Lee was still making steady progress towards him. He also sweating from the sheer exertion. The simple fact of walking put him through. As Lee approached, Shikamaru saw only one viable option left. He let Lee get a little bit closer, now no further than arm's length away, before lifting himself up and firmly smacking his head into Lee's. The two genin just stared at nothing for a moment before they both lost their grip on gravity and fell to the ground unconscious. Hayate just jogged over, checking to see if either had managed to avoid falling asleep from the blow. He approached, only for Lee to suddenly shoot to his feet, already in a fighting stance. Anybody that knew Lee wouldn't have found that odd. What they would have, however, was the fact that Lee was still completely unconscious. He swayed back and forth on his feet, but his eyes were firmly shut. He was mumbling under his breath like a sleep talker. Hayate wasn't sure what to make of the situation. Technically, it was a double knockout, but Lee was on his feet and apparently ready to fight. He narrowed his eyes for a moment before withdrawing a shuriken and throwing it so it would pass close to Lee's head. The young taijutsu master deftly cut the projectile, still fully asleep. Hayate guessed that made him still combat ready, and quickly announced the match in Lee's favor. His sensei came down to carry both boys to the competitor's box as the entire arena fell deathly silent. Naruto noticed the shift in atmosphere and looked around the stadium curiously, wondering why everybody now expectantly looked towards the competitor's box. Gaara just walked off down the halls to the stairway leading down the arena floor. That was when Naruto noticed the distinct lack of a certain red-eyed Uchiha, despite it being his match. He wondered where the boy could be. Why would you be late for something like this? Meanwhile, Gaara stood calmly in his required spot, patiently awaiting the arrival of his opponent. Nervous whispers began to circulate in the stands, as after 2 minutes Sasuke had still failed to show up. Gaara wasn't worried. He could wait for as long as he needed. 5 minutes after the match was supposed to start, and people were now really beginning to worry. It would appear that this was the match everybody had been waiting for, and the main competitor wasn't even there. Hey, where's Duckbutt? Taiga looked around at Ino and Sakura, both of whom were sporting the same worried and nervous looks that the rest of the betting audience were. Ino turned, scowling at the redhead, while Sakura just looked confused. What do you mean, Duckbutt? Ino doubled the ferocity of her gaze, which Taiga only found amusing. Sasuke. It took her a moment, but Sakura finally caught on, and immediately joined Ino in trying to burn a hole through her skull through the power of their combined will. Don't call Sasuke-kun that. Tayuya took an exaggerated mock apologetic look with a hand on her chest. Oh, I'm sorry I insulted your precious Sasuke-kun. She made very sure to say it in as sweet and innocent a voice as possible, which only made it sound even less sincere. I guess I'd be pretty scared if I had to fight Gaara as well. The other two kunoichi still seemed very mad at their previous worries, but their previous worries seemed to be overtaking them again. Sasuke would easily beat that sand guy. Ino nodded after her friend, but didn't look all that sure. Taiya just smirked, amazed at how easily the tables turned and she was the annoyer. Sure. After 10 minutes, the Hokage was forced to make a decision concerning Sasuke's possible disqualification for failure to show up. Luckily for the last Uchiha and all those betting in his favor, he appeared alongside Kakashi, who rubbed the back of his head rather apologetically. After a brief conversation with an annoyed Hayate to see if they could still participate, the Jonin retired and Sasuke took up his stance, ready to fight. Sasuke eyed Gaara with caution. Having seen what he did to Tenten in the preliminaries, he felt prepared but not overconfident. Gaara, on the other hand, looked at the Uchiha with nothing more than indifference, choosing to actually sit down on the floor of the arena. Sasuke looked extremely angry with that. He had seen Gaara stand defense before, but he didn't think the boy would actually be this cocky about it. Gaara maintained his cross-legged stance even when Hayate started the match. Immediately, Sasuke rushed forward, throwing kick after kick at Gaara, only for his stand to spring up and block it every time. Gaara literally could have stayed there all night, just waiting for the Uchiha to tire himself out, attempting to breach his stand. As it was, he was actually a little annoyed by how late Sasuke had turned up to the fight, even if he didn't show it. He started bringing more sand out of the gourd to complement what was already being used to block Sasuke's every attack. It started to circle him in a loose ring before expanding, slowly forming into a perfect sphere around him. Sasuke continued to attack the outside of the rock-hard sphere, searching for any weakness in the sand he could find. Soon, the sphere began to expand, moving outwards as a dome that grew in circumference. Now, every time Sasuke attacked, a spike would appear seconds after his foot connected with the dome. Only his reflexes saved his foot from being impaled and cost him the match. He began growing desperate as the stand continued to grow, now pulling the minerals out of the ground itself to feed it. He retreated out of the wall of the stadium for some respite, noting that the dome continued to grow even in his absence. Slowly approaching the wall of the stadium, he narrowed his eyes at the clever tactics. If he allowed the dome to continue growing, he would be crushed against the stadium wall. If he tried to land on top of it, his feet would only get caught, and if he fled the arena, the match would be forfeit. He had hoped he wouldn't have to use this so early, but with gritted teeth, he began to slowly draw chakra into his hand. Soon it crackled around his hand as lightning splitting the air with distinctive bird-like chirps. Chidori! He took a deep breath before taking off from the wall at a sprint, rushing down while leaving rubble in his wake from the speed and the barely constrained attack. As he approached the dome, which would soon reach the borders of the arena, he jumped into the air and, in an obviously copied way, he used the Inuzaka attack to spin wildly. Chidori held out in front of him. The drill-like attack worked, and he quickly broke through the normally impenetrable sand to land with a cocky smile inside. The smile fell off his face as he realized there was nobody inside the dome. It was conspicuously empty. The hole he had created ominously closed behind him before the dome began to retreat in on itself. Sasuke realized his mistake too late. As the dome collapsed back into a sphere, him held hostage inside. There wasn't enough room for Chidori, and all he could do was back into the center, awaiting the completion of his attack, of his capture. A minute later, and he was completely held within the sphere, floating a few feet from the ground and curled up into a ball to prevent any bones from being broken. Gaara could have crushed him if he wanted, but he left it like that. Everybody in the stadium watched slack-jawed as Gaara defeated the last Uchiha, held like an animal in a cage. Hayate announced Gaara the winner, and he immediately dispersed the sand. Sasuke dropped to the floor in an ungraceful heap. One sand shun later, and Naruto was slapping Gaara on the back, congratulating him and mentally grinning at the humiliating way he had beaten Sasuke. He didn't have long, however, as before long, he had to go back down into the arena to begin the second round of the finals. He looked over at Shino, who calmly looked back, both nodding before making their way back down. End of chapter 20.